Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com, where you can also sign up for my mailing list. I always have something new going on. I offer a new class about every 6 weeks or so, and I almost always have time for an angel session for you. So please stay in touch outside of this podcast. And also, if you are enjoying the podcast, I would be ever so grateful if you will leave a review on iTunes. It helps other people find the podcast and know what they can expect from listening. So this podcast is born of two of my very favorite forms of self-care, connecting with the angels and listening to a sleep podcast, which I do every night. Presently, I am listening to The Sleepy Bookshelf, and the host, Elizabeth, is reading Heidi. And you know, I could have sworn I read the book Heidi. I mean, Heidi's so iconic, right? And I'm sure I've seen a movie or a cartoon or something with Heidi in it. But as I'm listening to her read the book, I am realizing I don't think I've ever actually read the book Heidi. So it's a lovely thing to fall asleep to, and my hope is that this podcast will also serve as a companion to you as you fall asleep or as you go about your day. I know that many of you listen during your waking hours, and so however you choose to listen, you have my blessing. It's another early morning here in Northern California as I record this, and there is a really impressive breeze moving through the trees. And it's so soothing to just sit here and watch the movement and the leaves, how each tree behaves differently depending upon its density, depending upon where it is in the yard. But there's something that is just so soothing about watching and listening to the rustling of the leaves. So I send this energy, this vision to you with love. This episode will be dropping on August 9th, 2023. You may be listening to this years from now, but I'm recording it on August 8th, and it's thought to be the Lion's Gate. So there's a lot of posts on social media right now about the power of this moment, and I think that's a lovely thought. I don't know that I'm necessarily feeling that, but I am feeling so much energy the past few days. And so I thought I might talk with you a little bit about that as we bring the angels in, because many of us who are empaths and light workers, we feel energy even if we don't know we're feeling it. Over the weekend, I was tired and felt a bit wobbly. I said to my husband that I feel like I had just gotten over a cold, and I'm a few days out, and I think I'm feeling better, but I'm actually going out and realizing I don't feel great still. And it's not that I feel sick, but I just felt off. And then later that day, I saw an energy update posted on Facebook, and apparently there had been some rather significant solar flares. And the woman who was writing this update had listed all of these physical symptoms that you might be experiencing as a result, and I could tick off almost all the boxes. I don't really get how this works. This isn't some urban legend or myth about solar flares. All I know is I have these really off days when I have this series of symptoms, and usually within about 12 hours, someone posts something about geomagnetic storms and solar flares. And I think, that's what's going on. In some ways, intellectually, I guess it makes sense, not knowing much about physics or biology, but, that we are influenced by the Earth's energy and magnetic field. I don't know. I don't get how it all works. So I share this with you as just an anecdotal reflection on how, in my experience right now, we are navigating some really big energy. And I find during these times that it is important to be very kind to ourselves. I give myself time to rest. I try to remind myself to be patient, to have compassion, and to take these moments like this one to connect with the angels and watch the leaves in the trees moving and dancing and rustling with the breeze. I think we get so caught up that we always have to be productive or busy or accomplished. And who says that it is not a divine gift to ourselves and to this universe to sit in the quiet and watch leaves dance on the branch of a tree? Like, we should have to-do lists that include things like that, right? I'm going to just be with the trees for at least 10 minutes each day. And then I'm going to eat a really delicious piece of fruit and be present to its succulence and deliciousness. And then I'm going to listen to a piece of music that inspires my heart. Like, can we make it okay that our, quote, to-do lists include passive moments that nourish and nurture us? So I invite you to take a deep breath in, and I send you a beautiful breeze. I send you the rustle of butterfly wings as they move in a garden filled with beautiful flowers. I send you laughter that delights your spirit and inspires your heart. This is a beautiful, sacred moment, and the angels are here with you, your beautiful team of angels who have loved you since before you were born. And I'm going to invite them in to be with us, even though they are already here. And if you are preparing for bed, I invite you to get cozy and comfortable, pulling your blankets up just so. Take a deep breath in and release as we call ourselves forward gently, ever so gently, into the heart of God. And beautiful angels on high, I invite you to join us here. I ask that you bring forward gentle, soothing waves of love to each of our beloveds hearing this message. I ask that you help to clear anything that does not belong to us, anything not serving our highest and best good, to help release us from our fear and worry, to help us remember that we have the capacity to dance on the breeze like the leaves on a tree. Angels, I am so grateful for this opportunity to gather together with you to honor each of our beloveds here. So, dear ones, just take some nice deep breaths in and out. And with your permission, the angels will bring their energy closer to you. And this is a lovely, sweet time for you to share with your angels how they can help you. What would you like them to help you with right now? You might say, angels, please help clear my energy field through the heart of God. Help clear any heaviness from me. Help me come into a lightness of spirit and a place of inspiration and balance. You can ask for their help with anything. And it is their blessing to support you. And just breathe as the angels fill the room that you are in, the space you are in, with a beautiful, soft, pink light that has been calibrated just for you. There is nothing you need to do in this moment except to receive their love. And in this moment, I want to help you remember the beauty of your spirit. You are a beautiful, divine being having a human experience. You are filled with the wisdom of the ages. You are filled with magic and starlight and goodness. This world is better because you are here. And so just take a breath in and receive the blessings that are being broadcast your way. And allow the angels to help you connect with your authentic self and the brightness of your spirit. And just keep breathing. The angels come forward with a sweet reminder, especially for those of you who are getting ready to drift off to sleep. This is your time to rest your mind and your body. This is a time for you to get to take a break from everything that came before, to do a mini reset of sorts. to hold all of it up to the divine light so that it can be transformed in service, to give yourself the spaciousness to let go just for a little while, with the hope that you will feel more centered during your next period of wakefulness. So take a deep breath in, allowing the love the angels are streaming to you to flow to every cell of your body, every thought in your mind, and every emotion in your heart. The angels are creating a sanctuary of love for you, and they will be with you while you rest. They will take good care of you. And so, my beautiful friends, while you rest, I'm going to tell you a story. So, this story time is inspired by a really obscure, transient memory that showed up for me the other day. I must say, this must have been brought to the forefront by the angels, because it's so strange. I don't know why it came up for me. Maybe I saw something on social media that I don't consciously remember. But I am a child of the 60s and 70s, as I have already shared with you. And what I suddenly had the memory of is what I guess I would call a beer can hat, or a soda can hat more appropriately, because I was a kid. I'm going to tell you what that is in just a second. But what it has inspired for this episode is we are going to be exploring some of the crafts from the 70s. And maybe some of this, it was in the 60s too. I don't know, because I would have been a kid in the 60s. So the 60s and 70s, the kinds of crafts we did. And if time allows, I will segue into the craft I engage in now. Or maybe crafts, I don't know. We'll see where we go. Okay, so to start off, what is a beer can hat? Can also be called a soda can hat. And growing up in the Chicago area, we called soda pop. So we might have called this a pop can hat. So basically, you take a soda can or beer can, and it gets cut into panels. And then holes are punched into each panel, and you crochet a granny square around each panel, and then you attach the panels and add some more crochet, and it creates this bucket hat with a brim. I don't know why I had a vision of this the other day. Again, maybe the angels dropped it in so I would have some awesome fodder for a podcast. I don't know. But I suddenly had this memory of these soda can hats being super cool. I must have been somewhere around the age of 10 or 12, because I remember them being a thing while I think I was engaged in the temple choir. I don't know why the temple choir had anything to do with it other than someone's mom made these hats. So just to clarify, this was not a craft I engaged in, because as a kid it would have involved cutting metal and sharp edges. So this was not a craft for children. But a parent of one of my friends in the synagogue made these. And I remember asking for one from my parents. So they must have paid what my mom probably, I don't know how much they charged. And you got to pick the color of the can. So I don't remember this for sure, but I have this very vague memory that I picked a purple can because I loved purple, and that would have probably been Shasta grape or Fanta grape, some sort of grape soda that would have a purple can. And then I wound up getting one of these bucket can hats that I thought was awesome. And I don't know why it seems so funny to me now. Like, what an absurd thing. Who thought that up? Well, let's see. I'm going to get out my metal cutters. I'm going to cut a can. I'm going to punch holes in it. Then I'm going to crochet a granny square around it. And I'm going to string them together and I'm going to make a hat. And then I'm going to wear the hat. And we weren't the only ones. So if you Google right now a beer can hat, you will see a lot of examples of this. And maybe you had one or made one back in the day. They were very popular for a while. So that was the memory that had me dive down the rabbit hole of crafting back in the day, back in the 70s, especially as a kid. As a kid, at least for me, it wasn't about mastery. It was about the process. So I have a couple of memories of the kinds of crafts I did as a kid and some of the projects I made. Somewhere around the time of 8 years old, my mom taught me to crochet. My mom crocheted, and I was fascinated by this. She would move the hook and the yarn and create something. And for those of you who crochet, and if you've never crocheted, the first stitch you learn is a chain stitch. So it's really a slip knot that you keep doing over and over, and it's just a long piece of chained yarn. So there's not the body of anything really being built. But I remember her teaching me the chain stitch, and I went to town. I made a really long chain, and I was so proud of myself, right? It didn't matter that it wasn't anything other than a chain. And by a chain, I really mean kind of a woven long piece of string, not something that would become a necklace or something. It just was something I did with the yarn, and I was so proud of myself. And then she taught me 2 more stitches, the single crochet and the double crochet. Now, I won't describe these to you, but they're both pretty easy stitches. And once you know how to chain and single crochet and double crochet, you can make just about anything. Like, once you master those 3 stitches, there is a blanket in your future. And so the first thing I ever made was a purse. And so the purse required a big rectangle that would ultimately be folded over to create the purse, and then a super long strap. And that would all get sewn together, and then there would be a lining sewn in, a piece of fabric, because the thing about crochet is there's holes. And so if you were trying to use just a crocheted purse made by an 8-year-old without a fabric lining, everything would be dropping out of it all the time. So my bittersweet memory about this purse is I was either making it or I made it right around the time my grandmother passed away, my mom's mom, who I called Nani. And I remember just feeling sad that my grandmother would not get to see my purse. As kids, we process information in such a unique way. And I, of course, was sad that she was gone, but I remember specifically when I think about learning to crochet and that purse, that is forever linked to the memory of feeling sad that I wasn't going to be able to show her my purse because I was so proud of it. And so it was purple. So again, with the purple for me, it was this royal purple yarn. So that was the first thing I ever crocheted, was my very cool, hip, 1970s worthy purse. And it would have been 1970 because if I was 8 years old, I was born in 62, so perfect for 1970. So that was the first thing I ever crocheted. But wait, there's more. The other thing I was thinking about, and God bless parents, and good parents, I should say, because good parents treasure the things their kids make, right? And that's why we get refrigerator art. Oh, that's a beautiful tree that you drew, and it sits up on the refrigerator for years, right? It's whatever the kids make is treasured. And one of the craft things that was very popular in my childhood was this loom, and you would put these fabric bands on the loom and you would weave a pot holder. So I don't know how many of you remember the woven pot holders that we used to make on these looms that I'm sure were purchased at Toys R Us, and the loops that you wove in and out had many colors. And so I just seem to remember that every kitchen back in the day seemed to have these pot holders because the parents couldn't throw them out. Lord knows they were god ugly. But no one was going to throw them out because their kid made them. So whenever you went to a friend's house, there would be a pot holder. And the good thing was at least it worked as a pot holder. It was functional. You weren't going to burn your hand. But they were also very small. They weren't very big. And so I just remember the era of these woven pot holders that all of the moms, I'm sure a dad used one every once in a while, but I was raised in the era of moms doing all the cooking, that the moms had to use rather than some pretty pot holder that was likely more functional because it was bigger. They had to use these tiny little pot holders that their kids had made. So there were the woven pot holders that I think we all had back in the day. And I'll see how many more times I can say back in the day just to annoy myself and perhaps you as well. Another big craft back then was macramé. Raise your hand if you created a macramé plant holder. Like we all were macraméing like crazy people. And I don't know as kids if we macraméed in art class, but sometimes they would do strange things for the PE class or the gym class when it was raining outside and maybe the teacher didn't want to teach us anything that had to do with physical movement. And we would learn to macrame. And I remember we would use this rather thick white cord, this rope. And again, we made it. It was a plant holder or a keychain or whatever it was, and our poor parents had to use them. I don't have any clear memories of a macrame hanging plant holder in our house, but it must have existed because I know I macrameed. And then we would macrame and put these big chunky wooden beads on it because it was the 70s and that was very groovy. So macrame was definitely a thing. And I remember reading a book trying to follow along with the pattern to macrame something. I don't remember what it was, but was very complicated and beyond my ability. And I had a macramé board that had pins in it, and you would pin the rope, the different ropes you were using, to the board, and then things had to change positions. I don't remember. I was very young. But all I remember was I was determined to make this very complicated whatever it was. I don't have a memory of that part. And I gave up at some point because it was too hard and it was not turning out. So I sacrificed something to the macrame gods of the time. Another craft that I remember that actually kind of returned to me later was how many of you remember making lanyards? Now, the word lanyard is used in the modern era, which is what we'll call 2023, as usually like a black piece of woven fabric that you would put a security badge on. You know, if you're going to an event, that's what your badge is on. Those are called lanyards. In my day, lanyard was this plastic coated cording. It was flat and narrow, and it came in a rainbow of colors. And it seemed to be a summer camp craft. So whether it was a day camp or sleepaway camp, you would get a couple of lengths of lanyard cord and you would go to town weaving a keychain or a necklace or a bracelet. There really wasn't a lot you could create with lanyard cord, but that didn't stop us from trying. And the thing is I don't know that many of you will remember this, but for several years I had the blessing of attending Soul Camp, which was a sleepaway camp for adults that had all kinds of wonderful spiritually based classes and yoga, and I got to be one of the teachers at Soul Camp for a couple of years, and they had lanyard cord. And I just lit up when I saw it. I had forgotten all about it, and I had forgotten how to use it and do it, and one of my friends showed me, and I was so happy. I did lanyard weaving throughout the whole Soul Camp because it was so relaxing. There was something very soothing about creating the loops and creating the stitches and creating the lanyard. I mean, if it wasn't going to be such a waste, I would consider getting lanyard cord again just to do it as a soothing activity, but I wouldn't do anything ultimately with it, so it feels like it might be a waste, but I will just put a wave of love out to the memory of making lanyards as a kid, as one of my crafts. And again, I think many parents in the 70s kept their keys on a lanyard keyring that their kid made at camp that they could not get rid of. Another craft I want to pay homage to is sewing. Now, sewing isn't necessarily a craft. When I was in school, girls took home ec and boys took shop, which I can't believe, right? So they sorted us by genders back then. So strange. And in home ec, we learned to sew as a life skill. So sewing in and of its own, I wouldn't say is a craft. But where I will put it into the craft category is when I learned how to sew a stuffed animal, which I thought was super cool. I seem to recall my mom took me, and my sister too probably, so took us, to Minnesota Fabrics, which was our local fabric store, which was a world filled with wonder. Like if you've ever been to a good fabric store, right? It just screams of potential, right? There are these beautiful fabrics and they can become something if you just have the talent within you. And back in the day, we would search through the Butterick or Simplicity pattern book. So I might search for an outfit I wanted my mom to make for me because my mom would sew clothes for us sometimes. But then I discovered you could actually sew stuffed animals. Now that was super cool. So at some point, I seem to recall, my mom bought me the pattern to make a stuffed elephant. And the elephant sat on its butt, right? So I didn't have to figure out how to make it stand up. It sat on its butt. And the cool thing to me was the trunk. And bought some kind of groovy 70s fabric, which likely involved gingham of some kind. I don't even remember. And then I had to cut out the pattern out of that tissue paper, remember? And then lay it on the fabric and pin it on the fabric and then cut out the fabric and do my best to follow the instructions to sew this thing. Again, I was a kid. There was no mastery involved. But I am highly impressed that I knew how to use a sewing machine back then because I can't remember how to thread one now. But I knew how to fill the bobbin and, something helpful I learned in home ec. And then once it was assembled, I got to stuff it with the stuffing and then sew it shut. So again, I don't know whatever happened to the elephant, but I remember making it. I may have made a dog. I don't remember. But I think that likely was the end of my joy of sewing. So there was the sewing craft that I was involved in. I also remember making jewelry with plastic beads at some point. I do remember how many of you made a latch hook wall hanging or rug. Does anyone remember that? So you'd buy the pattern, you'd buy the kit, and it would have this big piece of, it was like a grid, right? A grid made of waxed cord somehow with a pattern printed on it. And then there were these very short pieces of yarn, and you would have a latch hook, and you would take the piece of yarn and you would put it on the latch hook, and you would insert the latch hook underneath the place on the backing where you wanted the yarn to go, and you would weave it through and pull a loop. I remember being obsessed with that for a while, and there was some sort of latch hook tapestry that I think I got 3/4 of the way through and then got tired of it. And at some point it annoyed my mother so much that she finished it. But again, I think many of us had latch hook wall hangings in our home. And maybe a way to think about it is the latch hook wall hangings were akin to the diamond painting of the day. Although I think diamond painting likely takes much more dexterity and fine motor skill than latch hook. Latch hooking would take. I'm sure there's more, but those are some of the crafting memories that I have from my childhood. I'm sure there's more, but those were the ones that came up for me. I'd love to hear what yours were. What were your childhood crafting activities back in the day? So now I'll share with you what crafting is to me now. I think there's a time as adults where if we're going to craft at something, we should be good at it. You know, there's a time, there's a period, I don't know, probably somewhere right before adolescence, where if we're going to engage in some kind of artistic or craft endeavor, we should be good at it. Which is kind of sad, because I also think creativity, we should have permission to be messy and imperfect. But back to the world of crocheting. So over the years, I have crocheted afghans. I remember that being one of my art projects when I was in high school. We had to come up with whatever kind of project we wanted to, and I crocheted this big blanket made of giant granny squares. I think the whole blanket maybe had 6 granny squares, so they were massive. Done in earth tones. Again, the 70s. Earth tones were life back then. And then I just barely learned to knit, and I would knit blankets. Again, nothing fancy, but I could knit panels long enough that they could be sewn together and made into a blanket. One of my more ambitious projects was I crocheted a blanket with these beautiful roses on it. So you would crochet the roses first, and then some green around it for the leaves, and then this lovely cream-colored yarn to connect everything. It was a lot of work, but it's beautiful. I still have it today, although at some point when we were teaching classes in our house, someone's kids spilled something on it that won't quite come out. But that's life, right? Things carry their own memories with them. So, and then I really didn't touch crocheting for a long, long time. If somebody had a baby once in a while, I might crochet a blanket for them, but it wasn't something that really called to me anymore. And then the pandemic happened and TikTok happened. So, clearly you already know about the pandemic part, won't go into that. So it's sometime in 2020, and I start watching TikTok, because what else are you going to do? And there's a lovely woman. I think her handle is Katie something. And she had this weaving machine. And she was using this yarn that was made up of like neon stripes. And she would thread this yarn into this weaving machine and crank the handle, and she would create these beanies that were gorgeous. I loved this yarn she was using. And so back in 2020, if you Googled TikTok beanie, you would see the beanies she was making. And the yarn she was using was a Red Heart, that's the brand, Red Heart yarn, and the colorway is retro stripe. And it's like pastel neon. I don't know how else to describe it. It's gorgeous. And it was selling out everywhere because now this was trending. And something you should know about me, if something is elusive and hard to find, I want it even more. You know, if I could have just walked into Walmart and bought a bunch of retro stripe yarn, I don't know that I would have been that excited. But I was able to order it through Joann's, and I ordered 12 skeins, not even knowing what I was going to make. But I had to have it. I was like, I will be happier if I have this. You know, whenever you feel that kind of obsession with something. So I felt very fulfilled when I got my Red Heart retro stripe yarn order in. Okay, around the same time as I'm watching Katie's TikToks, I hope that's her name, she is showing her home where she has a whole wall of shelves filled with yarn. And she talks about her yarn stash. And I came to discover that people have yarn stashes. Like, we have permission to keep stashes of yarn in the same way we have bookshelves of books that we might not ever read. Like, we can actually have yarn stash. And why that was important was before that, I would only buy yarn based on the project I was working on. So if I was going to make a blanket for someone, I would go and find yarn and buy enough yarn for that project, maybe have a skein left over, and I would be done. But this idea that I now had permission to have a stockpile of yarn that I didn't know what I was going to use it for yet delighted me. Now, the other thing that was happening around this time was I had my bariatric surgery. Again, all of this is happening in 2020. Why is that important? Well, one of the things they talk about with bariatric surgery is transfer addictions, because you're no longer able to engage with food in the same way. Now, when they're talking about transfer addictions, they're really warning us about things like alcohol and drugs. Well, my transfer addiction became yarn. I fell in love with yarn, and I became obsessed with the different kinds of yarn and where I could buy it and what the colors were. Now, it's not that all of this yarn just sat. I also discovered around the same time this concept of making prayer shawls. Now, I thought prayer shawls were made for praying. Like, you might give somebody a shawl that they would wear in prayer or meditation. But then I read that prayer shawls are created in prayer. So they're created with intention and love, and the prayers for the recipient are woven in to the shawl or blanket. And let me tell you, when I learned that, I was filled with purpose. I was like, this is my thing. This is it. I am going to create prayer shawls and prayer blankets for people that I love. And suddenly, that skill that my mother taught me when I was 8 came back. Now I have this love of yarn. I get to have a stash of yarn. I have these beautiful colors that are beautiful, and when I work with them, I'm happy. And so a new love for crafting, if you will call it that, for crochet, came back to me. I have since crocheted countless blankets and shawls. I don't do the shawls now as much anymore because I prefer to do blankets, because as someone who uses a blanket all the time, I prefer a blanket to a shawl. So I did shawls to start with, and now I have segued into blankets. I have an absurd amount of yarn in plastic bins in the garage and in my office, because I love yarn now. My preference for yarn, so don't go sending me yarn because I'm very specific about what I love. So don't send me your yarn, please don't do that. But I like the thicker yarn, the bulky weight or extra super bulky. And there's certain brands that I love, and sadly, 3 of my very favorites have been discontinued. So 2 bins of yarn in my office are filled with a bunch of the yarn that was just discontinued. So I bought as much of it as I could because it's gone. Another bin is filled with another yarn that was discontinued that I bought a lot of that no longer exists. And I have a lot of blankets, and I'm making a blanket right now for my cousin. So I just sent one to my sister that turned out beautifully. And so I love creating these blankets for people that I love. It's so joyful. And my yarn stash is getting a little bit ridiculous, and there's some yarn that I bought on sale that I don't really like working with. It's thinner than my preferences. I like working with thicker yarn because the blanket comes together more quickly. Whereas a thinner yarn, it takes longer. And I am someone who likes to see progress quickly. So I do have a bunch of yarn I am going to donate to our local senior center today. I texted them yesterday, or I emailed them, not that that makes a difference. I emailed them yesterday, and so I'm going to donate some yarn there. Because is there anything better than getting, yarn if you want to do a project? But again, please don't send me yarn. I have so much already. Unless you have, okay, here'll be my caveat, and I don't expect you to send me anything. But if any of you have Cascade big wheel yarn in your stash that you don't want, I will buy it from you because it is my favorite yarn right now, and they are no longer selling it. So Cascade big wheel yarn is life, and I need about 10 skeins to make a blanket, and it makes this very heavy, delicious blanket. So that would be the exception, but don't give it to me. I will buy it from you. So just as an aside, just in case you are sitting looking at a bin of yarn that happens to be Cascade big wheel yarn, and you're like, what should I do with that? Let me get in touch with Laurel. I heard she likes this yarn a lot. So I love that this skill that my mom taught me, I still use today, and I love it. There's a soothing rhythm to crochet that I love now, and it relaxes me. And the reason I do blankets versus a sweater or something is with a blanket, I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to count stitches. I don't have to pay attention. I just do this repetitive motion, and something beautiful is born. And so I hope you have something like that for you that soothes you. And I'd love to know what your craft is that you engage in. The other thing, and it's interesting, I know this isn't really technically a craft, but it fulfills my creative spirit, and that is Midjourney, which is AI, artificial intelligence, that creates images from your text input. So for instance, I can say to Midjourney, imagine a baby angel in a field of wildflowers, and it will create 4 options of images for me using just that prompt. And then, of course, you can add many layers of refinement. And since February, I have created thousands of images. And it delights me because one of my lifelong frustrations is that I am not gifted as a visual artist. The idea of keeping an art journal delights me. I've always been very disappointed in my results. I have tried drawing mandalas. Again, wasn't my thing. Like what I wouldn't give to be a gifted visual artist. And with Midjourney, the kinds of images I wish I could create, I'm able to create through these prompts. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy over Midjourney, but at this moment, I am just speaking to how it fuels my creative spirit and allows a fulfillment of a long-lived desire for me to bring what I see in my head into an image. So it's not quite a craft, but it delights me nonetheless. And then, of course, there are the crafts that I think I want to try and I never do. For instance, again, anyone watching TikTok over the past few years, have you watched anybody who does resin pouring? Where they mix the different colors and the sparkles and the crystals and do resin pours. Oh my God, that looks amazing. But then I think in reality, I would probably find it overwhelming to deal with the mess and the process and the whole shebang. I think it looks really cool in a 2-minute video because I just get to see the really good parts and I don't see everything that happens before and after. So I'm not really going to turn our garage into a resin pouring studio. But if I was perhaps a little younger and had more energy, I might give that a try. So for now, I will crochet blankets. And I will make my images in Midjourney and enjoy that. And so here's to the world of crafting, whatever that means for you. And extra points if you ever had a pop can hat. I'm going to do that like old school, like I'm still that girl from Skokie, because we would have called it a pop can hat back in the day. Super cool. Mine was purple, I think. Maybe my sister had one that was blue. I don't remember for sure. And also a big shout out to all the moms who had with them all of the crafts we made as kids. I even remember at some point I crocheted a red, white, and blue like beanie hat that I thought looked terrible, and my mom wore it. And I'd be like, Mom, don't wear it. It's ugly. I was a kid. And I was horrified that my mom was wearing this hat. And my mom would say, I like it. It keeps my ears warm. I even hid it at one point from her because I was worried she was going to wear it to a school event. I was such a kid. That was like my biggest worry, my biggest fear. My mom was going to come to school with this red, white, and blue hat that I had crocheted, and I hid it. It's one of my inner embarrassments from childhood. I don't think I've ever told anyone this story, so now you know a really embarrassing story from my childhood. And then once the event was over, I unhid it. So, Mom, sorry about the red, white, and blue hat. But my mom was the kind of mom that would use everything that we made because we made it, whether it was the potholder or the red, white, and blue hat. But I think that probably she drew the line at the soda can hat. She would never wear none of those. My mother was too stylish for that. So, thank you for letting me share these memories with you. I hope perhaps they have kindled some memories for you as well. Send me an email. Tell me what your crafting was like as a kid or what you love doing now. So thank you so much for letting me share this with you and sharing the breeze of the morning with you. And I send you so much love. I'm so grateful for you. I wish you the sweetest of dreams. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you.